All right, so really excited to bring up our next speaker. He's our keynote, and it's Brett Leonard. I'm sure a lot of you already know him. He's been a filmmaker for 30 years. I remember his first movie, Lawnmower Man, which just set the bar with virtual reality, actually helped a lot of us pave the way for the conceptual side of virtual reality, which I think it helped us take the cue and develop a lot of the technology that we're now using. He is also the director of Virtuosity, and he is doing some amazing stuff. He's always been one of the leaders, and he's a very inspirational speaker, so we're so proud to have him at Virtual Reality Festival. So please put your hands together. A big round of applause for Brett Leonard.
Hey,
Hey.
you hardcore dudes that are left and women. So, how you doing? Closing keynote on first day of VR Fest. Interesting. So, I am here to talk about celebrating all of us that are hanging in there and continuing to create things in this new crazy fucking medium. Because it has been an interesting past year. There's obviously been, a backlash, a bit of a pullback from the hype cycle, which I think actually is a very good thing, because I think that the wheat is being separated from the chaff. And I believe that this is actually exactly the right point to do true experimentation with content, because, look, we're at a point where we need to create experiences that are for a much larger participant set than what has been happening thus far. Now, this is not putting down any of the great work that everyone has been doing in this medium, because there's a tremendous amount of amazing, groundbreaking work being done by everybody, especially the kind of people that show up here at the VR Fest, who are really the die-hard core group of people in the world that are pushing this forward. But we need to create content that plays outside of our own room. A lot of the VR content has been playing in a context for all of us that already understand, already have an enthusiasm for this medium. And we need to get outside of that. We need to be creating content for people that have no idea about this medium whatsoever. And in that context, I think there's a lot of experimentation that still needs to be done. Now, one of the things I wanted to tell you about is a little story from my past, because we're at this moment where it feels like, well, is this ever going to really happen? I was a part of a company called L Squared Entertainment many years ago, and we had developed a thing called IS-TV, the interactive sandbox, and we created an entire business plan for it. We actually were working with Howard & Co. to take it public. This was in the mid-90s, and of course we developed it all the way up into where that internet bubble burst. And so we were never able to take IS-TV to the next stage. And IS-TV was literally about broadcast stations that individuals create for themselves. It was literally the YouTube business plan, but several years before that. Turns out Howard & Co. actually was one of the groups that took YouTube public and had our business plan for many years. But of course, timing is everything. We were putting this out before there was broadband, before there was really the ability to deliver this idea of a truly interactive, personal television station that you broadcast to yourself. And in some ways, the idea was even ahead of what YouTube is right now, but it was just way early in timing. And so I learned that lesson after putting many resources, and we actually did this thing called the CAA Intel Media Lab, where I was between CAA and Intel creating this thing for their A-list talent base, that we utilized the IS-TV brand as a way of showing that A-list talent base the future of participant media, of non-passive interactive experiences, and of things like Facebook and the internet. We were predicting these kinds of things back then. Of course, it freaked CAA completely out. They actually did this $10 million build-out off of their main lobby. I took everyone through it, including Marlon Brando, Tom Cruise, Sean Connery, and everyone was like, all the creative people were very, very into it. But the powers that be were very scared of it because it looked like it was changing the business model. And we're kind of experiencing a similar thing right now in the context of virtual experience, what I call VX, virtual experience, which is AR, VR, MR, all the R's, because there's so many ways of delivering virtual experience. And that's one of the things why there's a pullback right now. It is a medium that is going to change many things, including the business models around content. And that's scary for the people that are part of the status quo. And of course, the people that are part of the status quo have to have a foot in both worlds and have to look out for what's already their business model without having something cannibalize it. So there's a really interesting, pivot point that needs to happen. And I believe the thing that needs to happen in that context is creating greater levels of story, character, and emotion in this medium. Tony, my friend Tony Parisi just recently did a blog post. I don't know if any of you saw it. Tony's head of VR for Unity. And his blog post is called "A Watch Pot Never Boils." And his New Year's resolution for 2019 is to not watch the VR market every day and see, well, has it happened yet? Has it happened yet? Has it happened yet? Because if we focus on that, it's going to be a very depressing process, another depressing cycle, because the truth is, it's not there yet. And many of the people, I'm actually amplifying a lot of what a lot of the great panels that were here today have been talking about, is that we're all in this moment of, as they say in the I Ching, of biting through. We have to bite through this moment of really doing work that brings the medium more and more into the context of what an actual mass market adoption would look like. And that is, I believe, bringing great story, character, and emotion in a content that once the tech platform is more ubiquitous. Because Nolan, how many of you saw Nolan this morning? Nolan had a great talk, and he said many great things, and he's a guy to listen to for sure. And one of the things he's talking about is it's not going to have mass adoption until there's a platform that's more ubiquitous. He's absolutely right. But he's coming from the gaming side of things, and that's, of course, he created literally the gaming side of things, so that makes perfect sense. I believe the thing that is just as important as that tech platform becoming ubiquitous is actually bringing true storytelling chops to this medium. So how do we do that? So I've been waiting for the last several years to really jump in on projects, and that's what's happening for me this year. I'm going to talk about my most current project, which is a film called Hollywood Rooftop, which I did in order to bring the indie spirit, independent cinema, craziness to the medium. So we actually shot an entire feature film in 360 VR and 2D traditional cinema simultaneously. And we did it in, some of the people that are involved are here. Mark Ricard was producer. Don Schneider is one of the executive producers on the film. We did it at his CTC environment. We actually built an entire dome set there, so it's an immersive set with projection on the cyc wall and on the dome. So it's VR within VR, and we shot the entire feature in 18 days in both mediums. Now that's crazy. One of the other things Nolan said is we need to celebrate the craziness of this moment. So that was definitely me celebrating craziness, because to do 18 days of a full feature in both mediums, we actually have over 50 hours, 17 cameras worth of the VR 360 component and over 100 hours of the 2D. We are now in post-production on that project and are blending the two mediums together for the first time in a full feature. It'll be in segments. It's what I call a frag film, so it'll be in fragments. I don't call it a series because it's still a film. I still like to think of it as a feature film because that's what I do. I make feature films. And so it's a feature film in both 360 and fragments that's going to be combining 2D elements in what I call Cinema VX. And we've done some tests on this, and it's been very effective. And we're in the post process of actually creating a language around bringing those elements together. At this point, I'd like to show you a 3-minute teaser video on Hollywood Rooftop. Crank this sound, please. So I'll just keep talking. Okay, so Anyway, it just elucidates. It's a project about young actors that meet on a rooftop. In this case, a stylized sort of Hollywood of the mind rooftop that is a projection environment that actually reacts to the scenes that they're in, and just sharing their lives. Now, the thing that's fairly innovative about this is it's a dialogue-driven, character-driven, drama-driven piece. So there's an ensemble drama with overlapping dialogue, coming like a Robert Altman film. One of my, inspirations on this was the work of John Cassavetes. I tried to think, what would John Cassavetes do if he had a 360 camera? And he'd probably take a bunch of young actors and put them around the camera, and they create this theatrical experience. And then I would, in the first half of the day, cinematographer Ed Button and I would bring the 360 camera in. We'd shoot the entire sequence of a scene in 360. Then that would leave. And then we'd bring in the 2D cameras. And then we'd shoot the entire thing in a traditional cinema process with 2D cameras. And that was a real mindfuck, let me tell you, because just changing the nature of how you thought of storytelling and how you thought of creating the engagement with these characters and how the actual young actors in this actually, handled that was quite amazing. One of the reasons we used a lot of new young actors, apart from the budget, was this is a micro-budget film. This is the other thing about this that I think is really important. We need to do experiments that are this bold without getting millions and millions of dollars from a corporation or a brand, because we're not going to be able to actually do the kind of experimentation that's necessary to really push the medium forward in storytelling. And are we going to stub our toe in this and do things that are wrong? Of course we are, because we're trying things. We're doing it, but we're doing it in micro-budget. It actually was funded to a certain degree by a group called Seek VR. A woman named Mary Spio is one of the executive producers. She runs that. And it actually has distribution. They're going to be distributing the 360 film. So it's a feature film in 360 VR that actually has distribution. Right there, that's a very rare thing. And we're combining the mediums in this way. That's also a very rare thing. But we're doing it and making it up as we go along. And that's the spirit that we need right now in the medium. We need to not be so precious with the technical side of things. As a matter of fact, many technical advisors were telling me, you shouldn't do this. This is going to be totally crazy. You can't do this on this kind of small budget. But I went ahead anyway. We used the eHalo camera, and that camera allowed us to get some amazing stitching done in the cloud with the Google Cloud Stitch. It's the jump camera. And because it has very good stereoscopic, and I could get characters very close to the camera, almost within 2 feet, it actually fit the use case of what we're doing with this film. So it's using the technological advances to actually make efficiencies so we can actually creatively experiment more than trying to make it perfect from a technical standpoint. That was one of the reasons for this exercise with this film, so that we could actually get some real, strum and draying of the creative process into actually creating a film like this and utilize the technology for what it's supposed to be good for, which is to make things more cost-effective and more efficient as opposed to less so. So it was a tremendous experience, and we're actually having a lot of fun in post right now, and really creating some new things that are designed to keep and engage you more than just traditional 360 video, which can be a very static. Once you've looked around, there sometimes is not much reason to stay in there. Now, if there's emotional engagement, and there are many pieces that have that, then that helps tremendously. The fact that there's constant ensemble dialogue going on around you in this sort of hangout movie, and then we stop that and go into 2D cinematic expression of certain parts of the scenes, and then fold that back out into 360, it just makes it, everyone that's seen our tests have said, it's kept my attention better than what I've seen before, because it has more going on, and it's using cinematic language. I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I love cinematic language. It's something that I love just as much as I love immersive. So there's been this kind of Chinese wall between the two things, and I think that that's been a mistake. We need to bring all the mediums together and do what they do best to create a true kind of mixed media experience that can deliver the story, character, and emotion that I've been talking about. So that's what Hollywood Rooftop is about from a sort of indie spirit standpoint, micro-budget indie spirit, and we're finishing that now, and it will be released by Seek this year. It also will be released as a full 2D film. So we didn't get it. It's going to go? Okay. So that's just a little teaser of the film. Thank you. And you can imagine having all of these different matched elements. Having a full matched movie in both mediums is giving us a lot to play with. It's also a movie that was written by a woman, and she's one of the producers, as well as executive produced by a woman. She's the financer, and it's a diversity project in the context of the cast. We have a gender fluid character who's played by a gender fluid actor, and it's meant to really, sort of be young, just like this medium is young. So it's a fun piece for those that have an interest in those kinds of subject matters. So apart from this one, some of the other projects that I'm most recently just started getting traction on is I'm going to be directing a project called Dark Star. And Dark Star is written by Sean Stone, Oliver Stone's son. It is sort of a very similar film to Lawnmower Man in some ways, in that it's about a researcher that's using virtual reality to open up alternative dimensions. In this case, alternative dimensions of the astral realms, where a battle between these evil AI machine beings and astral realm angelic beings are going on. So it's a very wild, abstract, interdimensional story. We do have an A-list star, I can't say his name publicly, attached to the film. And we are doing it, again, sort of following along the Hollywood rooftop modality, which is a micro budget. We're doing this on what is a fairly low budget for a film of this style with A-list stars and a lot of visual effects. We're going to be creating this film in a way that is a new process, utilizing game engines for the graphic effects, so that we actually are creating a world-building process from the very beginning, from the first thought on, as opposed to making the film effects and then going back and making a game and doing that from new elements, because there's a lot of very inefficient aspects in the Hollywood production process that's still mired in a 1935 mentality, in all honesty. Even the most technically advanced films still have that mentality at the core. We need to think like this new medium is thinking, which is utilize the new tools to create the world-building elements that allow you to create a transmedia ecosystem around a creative IP like Dark Star, which is a very wild script that Sean has written and is attracting great interest from significant stars. But we're not going to be spending $50 or $100 million on this. We're going to be doing it just like I did Lawnmower Man at a time when computer graphic effects were very expensive. We did it very cost effectively, and it made a lot of money, and it helped build my career. That's what we need to do in this medium now. We need to be clever, and we need to use the technology as a way of being efficient so that we get the chance to truly experiment. Because if we don't do that, we're going to be hampered by needing larger budgets, and by needing so many elements that are going to hamper the ability to create something that I think is necessary, which is something thinking totally outside the box, bringing in a storytelling component that no one's ever thought of, because you're not going to get there without actually experimenting with the process in a very wildly collaborative modality, right? And so Dark Star is the next step, with the next higher budget. So I'm doing this in a very stepwise process. It also just got announced in Variety that I'm directing a film called Elijah. Now, Elijah is from the Bible story of Elijah. It is not a faith-based movie. It's actually an Old Testament blood and gut story with Jezebel. So there's a lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll in it, actually. And it's going back to what Hollywood was great at in the very beginning, which was it utilized Bible stories to build the medium of cinema. Cecil B. DeMille, one of Cecil B. DeMille's first big, experiences was the Ten Commandments, way back before he did the sound version with Charlton Heston. So what I'm trying to do is combine this old school Hollywood mentality of telling a great story that everybody can relate to because it's in the best-selling book ever written, and bring to that what they're calling the biblical universe. They want to actually create this virtual universe around Bible stories that are just great stories. Again, not from a faith-based standpoint, but from just a great storytelling standpoint. And that's very exciting to me. And this is a project that has a bit more of a budget. And it's, the fact that there are producers out there that are doing real films like this, that are reaching out to directors like myself, that have a passion for doing this hybrid approach of doing a traditional feature film and virtual components that are organic to the movie, not just, sort of gimmicky promotional elements to a film, but actually organically part of what the experience of this transmedia ecosystem around this creative IP is meant to be. That's starting to happen. And it's reached out to me out of nowhere. I didn't search these out. These found me. So I just wanted to say that from the standpoint it's a time to celebrate that this stuff is starting to happen. You know, I happen to have a foot in both worlds of immersive VR because of my past and also in traditional cinematic storytelling. So it's kind of a natural thing for me to do these kinds of projects. But I think this is what's needed for what also Nolan brought up in his talk, which is that everyone that's doing content in this medium needs to understand the business model. We can't just be an entrepreneur that says, yeah, I got a business guy. As he said, you know, that's a no-go right there. I understand the business model of feature film. I've had successes in that business model. So I'm basing things around that business model and yet organically including virtual experience components that are going to be very compelling and actually are at the core of the process we're using to make the films. And that's the kind of hybrid approach that I just want to suggest everyone start to look at and embrace. We don't need to throw the traditional mediums out as we experiment with these new mediums. And I'm not saying that we're not experimenting with truly interactive components. As an example, Servios is going to be involved, it looks like, with Darkstar. They're very into the project and doing a VR game, but that is inherent in the story. So in the storytelling, we're creating context for the virtual experience that is instantly recognizable by the crowd, by the, you know, the participant audience that's out there, as opposed to having them figure out, oh, there's this VR thing that's sort of a sideways component to a feature film. It's going to be organic in the telling of the story from the very beginning. And that's what I'm looking at doing with all of these projects, because I think that's the moment we're in. We need to set greater context. I've actually been saying this for several years, but it hasn't really fully happened yet. But it's now just starting to. And I think the reason for it is the pressure of this moment we're in. We're in the pressure of a moment of where we have to prove this medium is compelling enough to really go there. And I think the way to do that is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but to actually combine our understanding of storytelling, bring those chops into the medium, and combine it in a hybrid process with actual traditional mediums. And the more we do that, the more the virtual medium is going to be bootstrapped into actual mass adoption. And that's something I think is actually on the cusp of happening. So instead of, you know, actually celebrate, you know, being scared of the moment, in terms of there's been this, you know, pullback on the enthusiasm for VR, of course there has been. A lot of the money went to the wrong places. Everyone ran out of runway. Of course, this always happens in the context of any innovative medium. So it's not an unusual thing. But to think that this thing is not coming towards us like a 3,000-foot tsunami is delusional, because it is. There's an entire generation that's going to demand immersive experience with their traditional media experiences. Nolan also mentioned Bandersnatch. How many of you seen Bandersnatch on Netflix? Fucking amazing. I mean, that changed things. Now, I'm not saying that I want to do necessarily branching storylines with all of my projects. I think there are other ways to utilize a virtual experience than branching storylines, but it opens up an entire whole, you know, area that hasn't really been proven before, and suddenly we have that as part of the palette to actually go, well, look, that worked for them, and they did a great job on it. It was very difficult for them to do, by the way. It was they really had to get a lot of programming talent in there to figure that out and to actually deliver it in the way they delivered it. But it shows that the moment is happening with significant players and significant artists in the medium, and the projects I'm on are going to be absolutely being promoted with the enthusiasm for pulling this medium into mass adoption. And all of us need to figure that out, need to look at what we're doing and really think about it in that context, because that's the moment we're in. The opportunity is there, like low-hanging fruit, to do that. It means we need to stretch in our storytelling capability, in our technical ability, and in our understanding of immersive and interactive environments. These are all very, very unique, wildly collaborative areas that take what I've always facetiously called bringing unholy alliances together. Those of us that don't usually talk to each other need to talk to each other right now in order to figure this shit out. And there's a lot of amazing expertise sets that sometimes they're siloed. But one of my, you know, challenges is to lead a team where everyone talks to each other and actually opens up their language system and expertise set so it brings something unique out of the box to the process of creating even a traditional media movie that has these virtual experiences. So again, one of the things that Nolan said was, again, we need to celebrate the craziness of the process. And the more I believe we dive into that craziness, and I am definitely doing that, taking fiduciary responsibility for the projects I'm on, but diving into it and really experimenting with how we bring these disparate elements together, these unholy alliances together, the more this medium will move forward into mass adoption. Thank you.